My name is Hazel Vickers and I am 31 years old. 3 weeks ago my mother knocked on my front door for the first time in 5 years. She was wearing her good church blouse, the ivory one with the pearl buttons she saves for Easter Sunday and funerals. She had a travel bag at her feet and a folded piece of paper in her right hand. He did not hug me. She did not say she was sorry. She looked me in the eye and said, "We need to talk about what you owe this family." I stepped back and let her in. And then I walked to my home office, opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, and pulled out a manila envelope that had been sitting there for 4 years, 9 months and 16 days. Inside that envelope was every piece of evidence I had ever collected. Every ignored phone call. Every returned letter. Every screenshot. Every date, every note, every receipt of a family that decided I no longer existed, until the day it became expensive for them to keep pretending. She brought a list of what she wanted. I brought a record of everything she did. And I want to tell you exactly how that conversation went. Before I get into all of it, if you are new here, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This channel is built on stories like this one, real, unfiltered, and told by people who have been through the fire and came out the other side with receipts. It means more than you know. Now, let me take you back to Fitzgerald, Georgia. Population just under 9,000. 2 stoplights, 1 Piggly Wiggly, a handful of Baptist churches, and the kind of town where everybody knows your grandmother's maiden name and your business before you do. That was where I grew up. That was my whole world until I was 17 years old and started to understand that the world my mother had built inside our house on Dormany Avenue was a very specific kind of cage. My father, Earl Vickers, drove a propane delivery truck for 22 years. Same route, same thermos, same country radio station turned low enough that you had to lean toward the dashboard to hear it. He was a quiet man. The kind of quiet that you mistake for peace when you are young and understand as something else entirely when you get older. My mother, Beverly Vickers, ran the household the way a general runs a campaign. She organized the church rummage sale every October. She chaired the women's auxiliary. She decided which neighbors deserved a casserole after a surgery and which ones did not. And she made those decisions with the confidence of someone who had never once been wrong in her own mind. My younger brother, Clay, was her favorite and everyone in the house knew it, including Clay, who was gracious enough to feel slightly guilty about it and not gracious enough to ever say so out loud. I was the oldest. I was the responsible one. I made the honor roll every semester, kept my room clean without being told, and learned early that none of that would ever be the thing that made Beverly Vickers look at me the way she looked at Clay. I was the daughter who did everything right and still somehow always finished second. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it because the architecture of our family matters for everything that comes after. When I was 18, I left Fitzgerald on a partial academic scholarship to the Savannah College of Art and Design. Beverly packed my bags, ironed my good jeans, and tucked a card into the front pocket of my duffel. The card had sunflowers on the front and 4 words in her handwriting on the inside. "Make us proud, Hazel." I kept that card for 6 years. I kept it long after everything else she ever gave me had turned to ash. I met Dominic in the 2nd semester of my sophomore year. He was sitting across from me in a design theory seminar, taking notes in the margins of his textbook in a handwriting so small and precise it looked like a technical diagram. He was an architecture student, the kind of person who looked at a blank wall and saw not what was there but what could be. His parents had emigrated from Ghana to Atlanta before he was born. His mother, Adwoa, taught middle school math. His father, Bernard, owned a small contracting business in Decatur. They were the kind of family that ate dinner together every Sunday and argued loudly about football and laughed even louder about everything else. Dominic had his mother's patience and his father's stubbornness and this particular way of listening to you that made every conversation feel like the only one happening in the world. Our first real conversation lasted 4 hours. We were supposed to be working on a group project. The rest of the group left at 9. We stayed until the library closed at 1 in the morning, talking about everything except the assignment. He told me he wanted to build spaces that felt like belonging. I told him I wanted to design interiors that told a story. He said those were the same things said differently. I thought about that for 3 days afterward. We dated for 2 years before either of us said anything serious. 2 years of slow, steady, completely unremarkable happiness that I did not fully appreciate until it was the only thing standing between me and a family that had decided to let me go. He met my parents once during that time at Thanksgiving when I brought him home to Fitzgerald because I was 20 years old and still believed that love was enough to change the temperature of a room. Beverly smiled through dinner. She called him Daniel twice. Earl shook his hand and said almost nothing. Clay was kind in the easy, careless way of someone who does not yet understand what is at stake. On the drive back to Savannah, Dominic was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your mom didn't look at me once during the whole meal." I told him she was just shy around new people. I believed that. I needed to believe it. 2 months later, Beverly called me on a Sunday afternoon. She asked how school was going. She asked if I was eating enough. And then, in the same even tone, she said, "Hazel, I need you to think very carefully about where this is going with that boy. There are things you cannot understand yet about how the world works and how people in this town will talk." I told her I understood exactly how the world worked. I told her Dominic was the person I wanted to build my life with. The line went quiet for 11 seconds. I counted. Then she said, "You need to choose what kind of life you actually want." She hung up before I could answer. The letter arrived 8 days later. Beverly Vickers did not send emails. She wrote on cream stationery with a fountain pen she had owned since before I was born, and she wrote in the careful cursive she used for thank you notes and formal complaints to the city council. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. The last one said this: "If you continue down this road, you are telling this family that your choices matter more than we do. Your father and I cannot stand behind a decision like this. We will not be there. And if you walk into that life with him, do not expect to walk back into ours." I read that paragraph 4 times. Then I folded the letter, placed it in a plain envelope, wrote the date on the outside in pencil and put it in my desk drawer. I did not know then that it would become the first item in a collection that would stretch across 5 years and 31 documented pieces of evidence. I only knew that something in me, the part that had always kept every receipt and filed every document in the right folder, told me to hold on to it. So I held on. Dominic proposed on a Thursday evening in our apartment in Savannah. No restaurant, no performance. He made jollof rice, the recipe his mother had written out for him on an index card during his first semester away from home, and he set the table with the 2 good plates we owned and a candle he had bought at the gas station because he had forgotten to plan that part. He said, "I know this is not perfect, but I want to spend every imperfect evening of my life with you. Will you let me?" I said yes before he finished the sentence. I called Beverly that same night. She picked up on the second ring. I told her. The silence lasted 9 seconds. Then she said, "Hazel, I want you to think about what you are doing to this family. Not congratulations. Not tell me about the ring. Not even a question about whether I was happy. A warning dressed up as concern, the way Beverly had always delivered the hardest things." Earl got on the line, cleared his throat and said nothing at all. Clay texted me the next morning. 4 words. "Mom cried all night." I was sitting at my kitchen table reading that text with Dominic's ring on my finger and the jollof rice still in a container in the fridge, and I thought, I have never been happier and my family is treating it like a funeral. That was the moment I understood that Beverly's letter had not been a warning. It had been a verdict. And she had already decided long before I ever picked up that phone, that I was guilty of something she would never forgive. She had drawn a line in blue ink on cream stationery, and she was waiting to see which side of it I would stand on. I had my answer. I just was not sure yet how much it was going to cost me. The wedding happened on a Saturday in April, 6 months after Dominic proposed. We got married at the Savannah City Hall, a building with high ceilings and tall windows that let in the kind of afternoon light that makes everything look like it was meant to happen exactly the way it did. 17 guests. All friends. All ours. Dominic's mother, Adwoa, flew in from Atlanta the night before and brought with her a dress she had sewn herself, deep green with gold thread along the hem, and a pot of groundnut soup she reheated on the stove in our apartment kitchen because she said no daughter-in-law of hers was getting married without a proper meal beforehand. She held my face in both hands before we left for the ceremony and said, "You are already family. You have been family since the first time Dominic called home and could not stop talking about the girl in his design class." I did not cry until that moment. I had held it together through the getting dressed and the pinning of the veil and the borrowed earrings from my college roommate, and it was those 12 words from Adwoa Osei that finally broke me open. I thought about Beverly in that moment. I could not help it. I thought about how she should have been the one standing in that doorway, adjusting my veil, telling me I was already loved. Instead it was a woman I had known for 2 years who drove 4 hours from Atlanta and sewed her own dress and reheated soup on my stove, and I was grateful and heartbroken in the same breath. There was no aisle. There was a hallway with a checkered floor and a clerk who mispronounced Dominic's last name twice and apologized both times. We had a reception at a Caribbean restaurant on Broughton Street where Dominic's college friends pushed 4 tables together and someone gave a toast so long and so earnest that by the end of it half the table was crying and the other half was ordering another round. My dress was cream-colored, off the shoulder, found at a consignment shop on Bull Street for $85. It fit like it had been made for me. Dominic wore a dark green suit that matched his mother's dress because they had planned it that way without telling me, and when I saw them standing side by side before the ceremony I felt something I did not have a word for yet. That feeling would take me years to name. It was the feeling of being chosen by people who did not have to choose you. That night in our apartment after the guest had gone and the leftovers were in the fridge and Dominic had fallen asleep in his suit jacket on the couch, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at our wedding photo on my phone. Both of us on the city hall steps, squinting into the late afternoon sun, grinning the way people grin when they are too happy to perform anything more complicated than joy. I wrote a card to Beverly and Earl. Inside the card I placed the photo printed at the drugstore that morning. I wrote 3 sentences on the back. We got married today. We are happy. I hope one day you can be happy for us. I mailed it the next morning before I could talk myself out of it. Came back 11 days later. Returned to sender, red stamp still sealed. I held the envelope for a long time. Then I got a new manila envelope, wrote the date on the outside, and slid Beverly's letter inside alongside the returned card. Item 1. Item 2. That was how it started. Year 1 was the quietest year of my life, and I mean that in the worst possible way. I called Beverly 3 times. Voicemail every time. I left messages that I rehearsed beforehand, choosing each word the way you choose your footing on unstable ground. Hi Mom, it's Hazel. Just wanted to say hello. Dominic and I are doing well. He just started a new project. I got a part-time job at an interior design firm downtown. I miss you. Call me when you are ready. She never called back. I sent a birthday card in October. I sent a Christmas card in December with a photo of our apartment decorated for the holidays. A small tree we had bought from a gas station lot and decorated with ornaments Adwoa had sent in a shoebox from Atlanta. Earl sent 1 text in February. 6 words. Give your mother some more time. That text sat in my phone like a splinter I could not reach. I did not reply because I did not trust what I would say. Clay called once in March and it was the kind of call that starts warm and turns cold in the middle when you realize the warmth was just a vehicle for something else. He asked how I was. I told him. He asked how Dominic was. I told him. Then he said, you know Mom is really struggling with this, Hazel. It would mean a lot if you just gave her some space and let her come around on her own terms. I asked him how much space a person was supposed to give someone who returned their birthday cards unopened. He did not have an answer for that. We hung up after 4 more minutes of the kind of careful conversation that leaves you feeling emptier than silence would have. I printed the call log, wrote a note on a post-it, dated it and added it to the envelope. Item 5. Clay's call. March 14th. No resolution. By year 2 Dominic and I had moved into a slightly bigger apartment in the Starland district, a neighborhood in Savannah that was just starting to turn, old buildings getting new windows, empty lots becoming coffee shops, the whole street humming with the particular energy of a place figuring out what it wanted to become. Dominic had joined a small architecture firm. I had left the design firm and started taking freelance interior design clients on the side, building a portfolio 1 room at a time, photographing every project on my phone, posting them to an Instagram account I ran mostly for myself because I did not yet believe anyone else was watching. 3 clients became 7. 7 became 15. 15 became enough that I registered a business name. Hazel Osei Interiors. My name and his side by side on a state business registration form that cost $40 and felt like the most serious document I had ever signed. That same year, a mutual friend from high school named Petra texted me out of nowhere. He meant well. She always meant well, which was the thing about Petra that made her messages both comforting and devastating in equal measure. The text said, I saw your mom at the Ben Hill County Fair last weekend. She was with your Aunt Rosamond and some of the church ladies. Someone asked about you and she said you were living up in Savannah and that you had gotten yourself into a situation she was still praying about. I didn't say anything. Just thought you should know. I read that text 4 times. A situation she was still praying about. 5 words that told me everything about how Beverly Vickers had rewritten my marriage for public consumption. Not a daughter who found love. Not a daughter who built a life. A situation. Something to be managed, endured, and eventually resolved, preferably in Beverly's favor. I screenshotted Petra's text, printed it, dated it, added it to what was now a proper manila envelope with a binder clip holding the sections together. I was already running out of room. The miscarriage happened quietly, the way those things do, without announcement or ceremony or any of the drama that might have made it easier to explain to people afterward. I was 11 weeks along. We had not told anyone yet except Adwoa, who had guessed on a phone call 2 weeks earlier because she said my voice sounded different, softer somehow, and she had been right. We lost the pregnancy on a Tuesday. Dominic took 3 days off work. Adwoa drove up from Atlanta that Friday and stayed through the weekend and did not say much but sat with me on the couch for hours at a time, her hand on top of mine, not filling the silence but just being inside it with me. That was what I needed. That was what she gave. Thought about calling Beverly. I picked up my phone 4 separate times over those 2 weeks, and each time I put it back down because I could not figure out what I was hoping she would say, and I was terrified of hearing what she would actually say instead. I did not call. I did not add anything to the envelope. Some things were too private even for documentation. By the end of year 2 the envelope had 12 items. Returned cards, unanswered call logs, screenshots, Clay's call, Petra's text. I had started adding brief notes to each item, a sentence or two explaining the context, because I had begun to understand without ever saying it out loud, that the collection was not just for me. It was for later. For a version of later I could not yet fully picture but could feel coming the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. I was not keeping records out of anger. I want to be clear about that. Most weeks I did not think about the envelope at all. It lived in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, behind the folder labeled taxes and in front of the folder labeled insurance, exactly where you would put something important that you hoped you would never need. I was not building toward anything. I was just doing what I had always done. Keeping the receipts because the receipts were the truth, and the truth I had learned from Beverly herself was the one thing in a room that could not be talked over, reframed, or returned to sender. What I did not know yet was how much the truth was about to be worth. Our daughter was born on a Wednesday morning in late September, 3 years into our marriage. 6 pounds 4 ounces. A full head of dark hair and a cry so immediate and certain that the nurse laughed and said this one already knows what she wants. We named her Nola. Dominic held her first because I told him to, and I watched him stand at the window with her in his arms. This man who could spend 12 hours staring at structural load calculations without blinking, completely undone by 6 pounds of a person who had been in the world for 11 minutes. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said quietly, more to her than to me, "I've been waiting for you. I have never forgotten that. I do not think I ever will." Adwoa arrived the next morning with 2 suitcases, a slow cooker and a hand-quilted blanket in yellow and ivory that she had been making for 4 months without telling us. He stayed for 3 weeks. She cooked every meal. She rocked Nola at 2 in the morning so I could sleep for 4 consecutive hours, which felt at the time like the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. She taught Dominic how to swaddle using a dish towel because we had run out of receiving blankets during a particularly chaotic Tuesday. She called Nola my heart from the first day and never stopped. That was what a grandmother looked like. I knew it because I was watching one do it in real time, and the woman doing it had driven 4 hours from Atlanta and reorganized our entire kitchen to make room for the slow cooker, and her name was Adwoa Osei. I had sent Beverly the ultrasound photo at 16 weeks. Standard envelope, no note, just the photo and the date written in pencil on the back. I sent a birth announcement 3 days after Nola arrived. A card with her photo, her name, her weight, the time she was born. I sent a photo of Nola at 2 weeks old, asleep on Dominic's chest, his hand covering her entire back. 3 items added to the envelope in the span of 6 weeks. Each one a door I knocked on. Each one a door that came back locked. I stopped being surprised. I did not stop documenting. What surprised me was Clay. He texted 2 weeks after Nola was born, the longest message he had sent me in 2 years. He said congratulations, said he was sure she was beautiful, said he hoped I was recovering well. Then in the last line he said, "Mom asked me to tell you she's glad the baby is healthy." She could not send that message herself. She made her son carry it across the silence she had built, like a note passed under a door she refused to open. I read that last line 6 times. I screenshot the text. I printed it. Item 16. Clay relaying Beverly's message. Date note filed. If Beverly Vickers wanted me to know she was glad my daughter was healthy, she had my number. She had always had my number. She just preferred to use Clay as a middleman so she could claim proximity without paying the cost of it. Year 3 was the year the business changed. Hazel Osei Interiors had grown steadily through referrals, the kind of growth that does not make noise but compounds quietly the way interest does. I had 17 active clients, a part-time assistant named Rochelle who had studied design at SED 2 years behind me and could read a floor plan faster than anyone I had ever worked with, and a waiting list that had started as an embarrassment and become a business strategy. Dominic had left the architecture firm and started his own practice out of a converted studio space on Whitaker Street, the kind of move that terrified us financially for about 4 months and then started making sense. We worked side by side. His firm designed the bones of a space. My firm dressed it. We had started getting referrals together, clients who wanted both, and found it easier to hire the couple who already spoke the same language. A boutique hotel group based in Charleston reached out in the spring. They were renovating 3 properties along the Georgia and South Carolina coast and wanted a design firm that understood the particular texture of the low country, the light, the materials, the way a space needed to feel like it had always been there even when it had just been built. I drove to Charleston for the meeting alone because Dominic had a site visit he could not reschedule, and I sat across from 2 partners in a conference room on East Bay Street and talked for 2 hours about what I thought their properties could become. They hired us the following week. It was the largest contract Hazel Osei Interiors had ever signed. The number had 5 figures and a comma in the middle of it, and I stared at it on the contract page for a full minute before I signed. I called Adwoa that evening. She screamed loud enough that Dominic came running into the kitchen thinking something was wrong. I called Rochelle. I called my college roommate. I sat with Nola on my lap at the kitchen table while she tried to eat a crayon, and I thought about the $40 business registration form and the Instagram account I had started for myself and the $85 dress in the reception on Broughton Street, and I thought, we built this. Nobody handed us anything. We built every single piece of it on the foundation of 2 people who decided to keep going even when going was expensive and lonely and uncertain. I did not call Beverly. There was a version of me, the 20-year-old version, who would have picked up that phone automatically, muscle memory, because good news had always felt incomplete until her mother knew about it. That version of me had been very quiet for a long time. The Charleston contract led to a feature in a regional design publication, a glossy quarterly called Coast and Interiors that was distributed across Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. 4 pages, professional photographs, a pull quote from one of the Charleston hotel partners that said Hazel Osei Interiors had transformed their properties with a sense of place that most designers spent a career trying to achieve. My photo was on the 2nd page. Dominic's firm was mentioned in the same piece. 2 names, 1 story, the same way it had always been. Petra texted me the day the issue came out. She said she had seen it at a salon in Fitzgerald and that half the town was talking about it. She said Beverly had been at the same salon the day before and someone had shown her the article on their phone. She said Beverly had looked at the photo for a long time without saying anything and then handed the phone back and said, "She always did have an eye for things. She always did have an eye for things." 5 years of silence, and that was the sentence Beverly Vickers offered to a room full of women at a salon in Fitzgerald, Georgia, as though she had been watching my career with quiet pride all along instead of returning my daughter's birth announcement unopened. I did not add that to the envelope. It was hearsay, not documentation. But I wrote it on a post-it and stuck it to the inside flap of the envelope because I wanted to remember exactly when Beverly Vickers began rewriting the story. It was the same week Coast and Interiors hit the stands. Not a week earlier. Not a year earlier. The week the photographs were glossy and the pull quote was flattering and the name Hazel Osei was on 4 pages of a magazine that people read at salons in Fitzgerald. That was the week she always did have an eye for things. What happened next I did not find out about until Petra called me on a Sunday evening, 3 months after the magazine piece, while I was putting Nola to bed. Petra's voice had the careful, slightly guilty tone of someone delivering information they know will hurt but feel obligated to share anyway. She said, "Clay came home last weekend. I heard from Rosamund that there was a big family dinner at your parents' house." Apparently Beverly had printed out the Coast and Interiors article and had it on the kitchen table. "Clay was asking questions about your business. How much the Charleston contract was worth. Whether you had other big clients lined up. Whether Dominic's firm was growing too." Rosamund said Beverly kept talking about how proud she was, how she always knew you would do something remarkable. I listened without interrupting. Petra finished and waited. I said, "How long was that dinner?" She said, "Probably 3 hours." I said thank you and hung up. I sat on the edge of Nola's bed for a few minutes after she fell asleep, watching her breathe the way parents do when they need to remember what is real and what is not. Then I went to my office, opened the bottom drawer, pulled out the envelope and added a new item. Item 22. Petra phone call. Sunday, October 19th. Beverly displaying the magazine article at a family dinner. Asking questions about business revenue through Clay. Characterizing estrangement as pride. I wrote the note in even handwriting, clipped it to the post-it and put the envelope back. Then I sat at my desk in the quiet of the house, Nola asleep down the hall and Dominic's desk lamp glowing from the corner of the room where he was still working, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just clarity. The kind that arrives not with a bang but with the slow, certain feeling of understanding exactly what is coming and knowing for the first time that you are completely ready for it. Clay showed up in Savannah on a Friday afternoon without calling first. That was the detail that told me everything. He texted at noon to say he was already in the city, already parked 2 blocks from our studio on Whitaker Street, and asking if I had time to grab coffee. Not asking if he could visit. Not asking if the timing worked. Already here, already parked, phrasing it as a casual coincidence the way you phrase something you have been planning for weeks. I texted back one word. Sure. I told Rochelle to hold my 2 o'clock and walked 2 blocks to the coffee shop on the corner of Whitaker and Jones and got there before he did on purpose, because I wanted to be seated and settled and watching the door when he walked in. Clay looked older than I expected. He was 27 now and the softness of his early 20s had sharpened into something more angular, not harder exactly, just more defined. He hugged me in the doorway and held on a beat too long, the hug of someone who is either genuinely glad to see you or needs you to believe they are. He ordered a coffee, sat down, looked around the shop with the studied casualness of someone trying to seem like they are not noticing how nice everything is. Then he asked about Nola. How old was she now? Was she talking yet? What was she like? The questions were real enough and I answered them honestly because Nola deserved to have her uncle know who she was even if the circumstances of his visit were not what he was pretending them to be. He asked about the business 40 minutes in. He eased into it, I will give him that. He asked how the Charleston project had gone, said he had seen the magazine piece, said the photos were beautiful. Then he said in the same conversational tone, how's the business doing overall? Are you and Dominic comfortable? Like, are things genuinely good? I looked at him across the table. He had Beverly's eyes, the same shade of pale gray, and right now they had the particular quality of eyes that are trying to look casual while the brain behind them is taking very careful inventory. I said the business was doing well. I said we were genuinely good. I did not give him numbers. I did not give him details. I gave him the shape of an answer with nothing inside it and watched him try to figure out how to ask the same question differently. He tried twice more. Once by asking whether we had considered expanding to Atlanta, framed as a business question but really a question about scale and revenue. Once by asking whether Dominic's firm was taking on bigger projects now, framed as brotherly interest but really a question about combined income. I answered both the same way. Generally, warmly with no specifics. When we hugged goodbye on the sidewalk he said, "It's really good to see you, Hazel. Mom asks about you, you know." "She does." I nodded. I said, "Tell her I said hello." He nodded back. We both knew what that sentence cost neither of us. I walked back to the studio, sat at my desk and wrote out the visit in a detailed note while it was still fresh. Item 23. Clay in-person visit. Friday, November 8th. 47 minutes. 3 attempts to quantify business income. No apology on Beverly's behalf. No mention of Nola's returned birth announcement. Filed. What I did not know when Clay left Savannah that afternoon was that he had not come alone. Petra told me 6 days later. She said Clay had driven down with Beverly. That Beverly had stayed in a hotel 2 miles from our studio, a Marriott on Bay Street, while Clay had coffee with me. That Beverly had asked Clay to come back to the hotel after our meeting and had debriefed him the way a lawyer debriefs a witness, asking what I said, how the studio looked, what kind of car I was driving, whether I seemed stressed or relaxed, whether I had mentioned any specific clients or contracts by name. Petra heard it from Rosamund, who heard it from someone who worked at the front desk of the Marriott and recognized Beverly from church. Fitzgerald was a small town. Information traveled in Fitzgerald the way water traveled in low country, finding every crack. I sat with that information for a long time. Beverly had been 2 miles away. She had sent Clay in as her advance team, her scout, her instrument of reconnaissance, and she had sat in a hotel room on Bay Street waiting for a report on her own daughter's life while her granddaughter was 4 miles away, not knowing her grandmother existed. Nola had a book on her shelf that Adwoa had given her at 18 months. A picture book about a little girl and her grandmother who baked together on Saturday mornings. Nola called it the Grammy book. She did not have a word yet for Beverly Vickers because Beverly Vickers had never given her a reason to learn one. I printed Petra's message. Item 24. Clay visit confirmed as coordinated reconnaissance with Beverly present in Savannah. Beverly stayed at Marriott Bay Street. Did not make contact. Red pen. Dated. The contract that changed everything came through in February, 4 months after Clay's visit. A hospitality group out of Atlanta was developing a new boutique resort on Cumberland Island, a barrier island off the Georgia coast that is mostly national seashore. No cars, no chain stores, accessible only by ferry, one of the most architecturally and environmentally specific locations I had ever been asked to work in. They wanted an interior designer who understood coastal Georgia at a level that went beyond aesthetics. They had seen the Coast and Interiors feature. They had called 2 of the Charleston hotel partners as references. They offered us the project on a Thursday morning, and by Friday afternoon Dominic and I were on the ferry to Cumberland with a camera and a notepad, walking through the building site in the salt grass with the ocean on 3 sides, both of us quiet in the particular way of people who understand they are standing at the beginning of something significant. The Cumberland Island contract was the largest single project either of our firms had ever taken on. The number had 6 figures. The timeline was 18 months. The press coverage started before we had even broken ground. A mention in a Georgia architecture newsletter, then a longer piece in an Atlanta lifestyle magazine, then a brief segment on a Savannah news station that ran on a Tuesday evening during the local interest block. The segment was 90 seconds. It showed the ferry, the island, a photograph of Dominic and me at the building site, and a quote from the hospitality group's lead developer calling our partnership one of the most creatively rigorous design collaborations they had ever worked with. 90 seconds on a local news station. That was all it took. Petra texted me the morning after the segment aired. She said her phone had been going since 7 in the morning with people from Fitzgerald sending her the clip. She said the women's auxiliary group chat had been active all morning. She said Beverly had been at the early service at church that Sunday and 3 separate people had come up to her after the service to say they had seen the segment and that she must be so proud. Petra said Beverly had smiled and said yes, of course, every mother is proud when her child succeeds. She said it to 3 different people. Every mother. As though the preceding 5 years had been a brief intermission rather than a deliberate severing. As though she had been in the audience the whole time, watching warmly from the dark, waiting for the right moment to take her bow. That same week Clay texted me again. This time he did not bother with preamble. The message said, "I think it's time you and Mom talked. She's not going to reach out first, you know how she is, but I really think if you called her she would pick up. A lot has changed. She's been following your work. She knows how well things are going. I think she's ready." I read it twice. I think she's ready. Not I think she's sorry. Not she understands now what she did. Ready. As though Beverly's readiness was the variable that had been missing all along, as though the obstacle had always been her reluctance to receive rather than her willingness to cause harm. I did not reply to Clay that day. I did not reply the day after. On the 3rd day I sent one sentence. "Tell her she knows where to find me." He did not text back. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, I was at my desk reviewing finish samples for the Cumberland Island project when my phone lit up with a number I did not recognize. Georgia area code, not Savannah, not Atlanta. I let it ring. Voicemail. I waited 2 minutes and played it. The voice was Beverly's. Stripped of the polish she usually kept on it, quieter than I had heard it in years. The voice she used in the early mornings before she had fully assembled herself for the day. She said, "Hazel, it's your mother. I need to talk to you about something important. It's about your father. Please call me back." He did not say I love you. She did not say I'm sorry. She said it's about your father, which was not a reason to call. It was a key, carefully chosen, inserted into the one lock she believed I had never fully closed. I set my phone face down on the desk and looked at the finished samples for a long time. Then I picked up the phone, went to the envelope in the bottom drawer, added a new item. Item 27. First direct voicemail from Beverly in 5 years. Tuesday, February 18th. No apology. Invoked Earl's name as entry point. Noted. Filed. I closed the drawer and went back to work. I called Beverly back 4 days after the voicemail. Not because I was ready, not because I had forgiven anything, but because the word father sat in my chest like a stone I could not dislodge, and I needed to know what she meant by it. Earl Vickers was 63 years old and had been driving a propane truck on the same route for 22 years, and the last text he had ever sent me was 6 words long and 3 years ago. And whatever was happening with him, I was not going to learn about it from a voicemail that Beverly had composed the way she composed everything, with precision, with strategy, with the exact amount of information needed to produce the exact response she wanted. She picked up on the first ring. That told me she had been waiting. She said Hazel like she was exhaling a breath she had been holding since February, relief and possession in equal measure, the sound of someone who had been uncertain about whether the key would work and now knew that it had. I said, "What is going on with Dad?" She paused for exactly 2 seconds and then she told me. Earl had been having chest pains for 6 months. He had seen a cardiologist in Tifton in December. He needed a procedure, a catheterization, possibly a stent depending on what they found. He was scheduled for the following month. The insurance would cover most of it but not all of it. There was a gap. She used the word gap the way accountants use it, clinically, as though she were describing a line item rather than asking her estranged daughter for money. I asked how large the gap was. She said around $14,000. I asked why she was telling me. She said because you are his daughter and because we need help and because I did not know who else to call. 3 reasons. Not one of them was because I am sorry for what I did to you. I told her I would think about it. She said she understood. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table and did not move for a long time. Dominic was putting Nola to bed in the next room and I could hear her asking him to do the voice, the low funny voice he did for the alligator character in her favorite book. And he was doing it and she was laughing, and I sat at the kitchen table in the sound of that and tried to figure out what I was actually feeling. It was not anger. I had done most of my anger work quietly over 5 years in a filing cabinet in my home office. It was not grief, or not only grief. It was something more complicated than either of those things. It was the feeling of being asked to be generous by someone who had never been generous with you, and not knowing whether the right answer was the kind one or the honest one, and not being sure yet whether those were the same thing. Dominic came out after Nola was asleep and I told him everything. He sat across from me at the table and listened without interrupting, which was one of the things about him that had never changed in 8 years. When I finished, he said, "What do you want to do? Not what do you think we should do? Not here is what I think. What do you want to do?" I said I did not know yet. He said, "Then we don't do anything yet." We went to bed. I lay awake for 2 hours. I was not thinking about the $14,000. Which we could have written a check for without rearranging anything. I was thinking about what writing that check would mean. What story it would tell. Whose version of the last 5 years it would confirm. I called a woman named Grace Tillman the next morning. Grace was a family attorney in Savannah, mid-50s, the kind of person who had heard every version of every family story and responded to all of them with the same level, unhurried competence. I had found her 3 years earlier. The first time I started to understand that Beverly's trajectory was heading somewhere specific, and I had kept her number in my phone ever since. I told Grace the situation. She listened, asked 4 questions, and then told me in plain language what I needed to know. Earl's medical bills created no legal obligation on my part whatsoever. Beverly had no claim on our assets, our business income, or anything connected to Hazel Osei Interiors or Dominic's firm. The fact that I had not spoken to Beverly in 5 years and had documented that estrangement thoroughly was, in Grace's words, a very clean record. She said if Beverly showed up and things became complicated, the documentation would matter. I thanked her and hung up and felt the same thing I always felt after talking to Grace, which was the quiet, grounding reassurance of knowing exactly where you stand. I did not call Beverly back that week. I needed the distance. What I did instead was pull out the envelope on a Wednesday evening after Nola was asleep and go through every item from the beginning. Not out of anger, not out of some desire to rehearse a confrontation, but because I needed to remember the full shape of what had happened before I decided anything about what happened next. Item 1. Beverly's letter on cream stationery. Item 2. Our wedding photo returned. Item 3. The Christmas card. Item 4. Earl's 6-word text. Item 5. Clay's March phone call. I went all the way through to item 27, Beverly's voicemail invoking Earl's name. And when I reached the end, I sat back and looked at the stack of documents on my desk and understood something I had been circling for years without landing on directly. Beverly had not reached out because Earl was sick. Beverly had reached out because the Cumberland Island story had been on a Savannah news station and the women's auxiliary group chat had been active all morning, and 3 people at church had asked her why she must be so proud. And Beverly Vickers could not answer that question the way she needed to answer it without first closing the gap between herself and me. Earl's health was real. His need was real. But it was also convenient. And Beverly had never in her life failed to make use of something convenient. I texted Clay that Thursday. I said I had spoken to Beverly and I was aware of the situation with Earl, and I wanted Clay to know that I cared about Dad's health and was thinking about what I could do to help. Clay replied within 4 minutes. A long message, warm and relieved in tone, saying how much it meant that I had reached out, how hard things had been, how much he had missed me, how he hoped this was the beginning of something. I read it twice. Then I noticed something in the second paragraph that made me read it a third time. He wrote, "Mom's going to be so relieved. She's been trying to figure out the money situation for weeks and she was really worried you wouldn't respond. I know it's a lot to ask, but you have no idea how much this would mean to the whole family." The whole family. Not Dad specifically. The whole family. I set the phone down and picked up a pen and wrote a note on a post-it. Clay's text, Thursday, March 6th. Language shifts from Earl's health to family financial relief. Item 28. Beverly called again on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after the first call, while I was in the studio reviewing lighting specifications for Cumberland Island. This time her voice had more of its usual structure back, less raw, more assembled. She said she wanted to come to Savannah. She said there were things she needed to say in person. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking and she believed a conversation face-to-face was the right way to handle this. I said I would think about it. She said she would not take up much of my time. I said I would let her know. We hung up. I sat with the lighting specifications in front of me and thought about the word handle. She believed a conversation face-to-face was the right way to handle this. Not resolve. Not repair. Handle. Beverly had always chosen her words with the precision of a surgeon, and handle was the word of someone who was coming to manage a situation, not to answer for one. I said yes 2 days later. I told her she could come the following Tuesday. I told her to come to the house, not the studio, because the house was where Nola's drawings were on the refrigerator and Adwoa's photo was on the wall, and the evidence of the life we had built without her was visible in every room. I wanted her to see it. Not to punish her with it. To make sure she understood exactly what she had been absent from before she said a single word about what she needed. I also did something else that week. I took the manila envelope out of the filing cabinet and transferred everything into a proper expanding file folder, tabbed by year, every item in order, every note clipped to its document. 28 items. 5 years. I set it on the corner of my desk where I would be able to reach it without getting up. Then I went to pick up Nola from Adwoa, who had driven up for the week because she came every 6 weeks without fail, without cancellation, without a single returned envelope, and I held my daughter in the parking lot of the community center while she told me about the turtle she had seen in the garden, and I thought, this is what showing up looks like. Beverly was coming on Tuesday. I had been ready for a long time. Beverly arrived at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. I know the exact time because I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing a mug and watching the driveway when the taxi pulled up. She got out slowly, the way people get out of cars when they are buying themselves a few extra seconds to prepare. She was wearing her good church blouse again, the ivory one with the pearl buttons, and I noticed she had ironed it with the kind of precision you reserve for things that matter. Her hair was set. Her posture was assembled. She looked like a woman who had rehearsed this entrance in a mirror and was now performing it on the actual stage. She stood at the end of the driveway and looked at the house the way you look at something you have been constructing a picture of in your head and are now measuring against the real thing. Then she walked up the path and rang the bell. I opened the door. We stood 3 feet apart in the morning light and looked at each other. She was older than I had prepared myself for. More gray. Lines around her mouth that had settled deeper than I remembered from the last time I had seen her face, which had been in a photograph Petra had sent me 4 years ago. Her eyes, pale gray and sharp and always reading the room, were wet at the edges. He said, "Hazel." I said, "Mom." A silence that lasted 4 seconds and contained 5 years. Then I stepped back and let her in. I did not take her to the living room. I took her to the kitchen. Nola's artwork covered the refrigerator in overlapping layers, crayon suns and lopsided horses, and one very ambitious attempt at drawing the Cumberland Island ferry that looked more like a floating rectangle but had been taped up with the same reverence as everything else. Adwoa's photo was on the wall beside the window, a framed print from Nola's second birthday, the three of us at the kitchen table with cake on our faces, Adwoa laughing so hard her eyes were closed. I set 2 glasses of water on the table. No coffee. Beverly sat down. She looked at the refrigerator. She looked at Adwoa's photo and she looked at it for longer than she looked at anything else in the room, and I watched her face while she did, and what I saw there I could not cleanly name. It was somewhere between guilt and hunger, the expression of someone who recognized what they had missed and had not yet decided whether to admit it. She opened her purse and took out a folded piece of paper. Her handwriting, blue ink, the same careful cursive she had used on cream stationery 5 years ago when she told me not to walk back through her door. She smoothed it on the table and said, "I need to talk to you about your father and about what our family is facing right now." I could see it was a list. I said, "Before you do that, I need you to wait here for one moment." I went to my office. The expanding file folder was on the corner of my desk exactly where I had left it. I picked it up and carried it back to the kitchen and set it on the table beside her piece of paper. She said, "What is that?" I said, "You brought something to show me." "I brought something to show you too." She read her list aloud. Earl's medical procedure, the insurance gap $14,000. The property taxes on the Dormany Avenue house, 3 years behind $11,000. Clay had lost his job in January and needed help getting back on his feet. She did not give a number, just said whatever you could manage. She folded the paper and placed it between us and said, "I am not asking for charity. I am asking you to help your family." I looked at the list. Then I opened the expanding file folder to the first tab and took out the first document and placed it on the table. It was her letter. The original one, on cream stationery, 5 years old, the paper soft at the folds from being handled and refolded more times than I could count. I said, "This is the letter you sent me 8 days after I told you Dominic had proposed. I'm going to read you the last paragraph." I read it without raising my voice, the same way I presented specifications to clients, factual, measured, clear. "If you continue down this road, you are telling this family that your choices matter more than we do. Your father and I cannot stand behind a decision like this. We will not be there. And if you walk into that life with him, do not expect to walk back into ours." I set the letter down. Beverly's jaw tightened. I moved to the next document. Our wedding photo. Still in the original envelope, red stamp facing up, sealed. I said, "This is the card I mailed you the morning after we got married." Our wedding photo was inside. You returned it without opening it. Beverly looked at the envelope. She pressed her lips together. Kept going. The Christmas card returned. The birthday card from year 1 returned. Earl's 6-word text, printed and dated. Clay's call, March, noted and filed. I laid them out one by one across the table, not hurrying, not editorializing, just placing each document down and naming it and moving to the next, the way you lay out evidence in an audit. Beverly's eyes followed each item. Her face moved through several expressions I had seen on it before and one I had not. Something stripped and undefended that surfaced briefly and then retreated behind the familiar architecture of composure. I reached the documents from Nola's arrival. The ultrasound photo returned. The birth announcement returned. The newborn photo of Dominic holding her returned. I said, "Nola is 4 years old. She has never received a card from you. She has never heard your voice. She calls Adwoa a Grammy and she has a book about a little girl and her grandmother and she asks Dominic to read it to her 3 times a week. And the grandmother in that book is the only version of the word she has ever had access to because you returned every photograph I ever sent you of her face." Beverly made a sound, not a word, something between a breath and a syllable that did not make it all the way out. Kept going. I read Clay's text from March, the one where the language shifted from Earl's health to the whole family's financial situation. I read the note about the Marriott on Bay Street, Beverly 2 miles from our studio, while Clay sat across from me counting the details of my life. I read the post-it about the salon in Fitzgerald. She always did have an eye for things. 5 years of silence repackaged as quiet pride the week the magazine feature ran. Beverly's composure had been coming apart in sections, and by the time I finished reading the post-it she was not assembled anymore. Her eyes were wet and the muscles in her face had stopped performing anything and she looked, for the first time in as long as I could remember, like a person rather than a position. He said I was wrong. She said it quietly, without theatrical weight, without the controlled cry she reached for when she wanted sympathy without cost. Just 3 words in a flat, tired voice that sounded like something that had been sitting in a room by itself for a long time and had finally been let out. I was wrong about Dominic. I was wrong about all of it. I looked at her and the 5 years were right there between us, every document, every returned envelope, all of it visible. I said, I know you were. She looked at her hands. She said, I do not know how to undo it. I said, you cannot undo it. That is the part you have to live with. I closed the folder. I placed it on top of her list and said, I will cover Earl's procedure. Not because you asked me to, not because it wipes anything clean, but because he is my father and I do not want him to be in pain, and that has always been true even when he was enforcing your silence. She looked up. I said, the property taxes and Clay's rent are not my responsibility. Beverly started to speak. I said, I am not finished. If you want to know, Nola, that conversation begins with a real apology, not to me, to her when she is old enough to receive it, and it begins with you earning that introduction slowly, not claiming it because the situation is now convenient. There are no shortcuts through what you built. Beverly nodded. One small, unadorned nod. The most honest gesture I had seen from her in a decade. She left 40 minutes later. She did not take her list off the table. She stood at the front door and said, I am sorry, Hazel. I said, I know. She walked down the path to the waiting taxi and I stood in the doorway and watched her go. This woman who had written me out of her family in careful cursive and then watched from a hotel 2 miles away while her son counted the rooms in my life. The taxi pulled away. I went back to the kitchen and picked up her list and looked at it one more time, then set it down and looked at Adwoa's photo on the wall instead. Adwoa with cake on her face, laughing with her eyes closed, and Nola between us with both arms raised like she had just won something. That was my family right there in the frame. Not the one I came from. The one I built. And it had been enough every single day that Beverly Vickers had chosen to stay away. If this story made you feel something, don't just scroll away. There are so many stories out there that never get told, and here on Confira Stories we bring them to life. So if you enjoy emotional, real-life drama like this, take a second to subscribe and be part of the journey. And if you've ever been in a situation like this, or have a story of your own, share it in the comments. I read them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.